Hello students, Professor Benavides here. Let's talk about Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is about functions. I've cut it up in different parts. First, we're going to talk about how we can define a function. We'll talk about passing arguments in this video. And then in other videos, we'll talk about returning values and some other special features like putting functions inside of a module and stuff like that. So what will you learn in this chapter? Specifically, we're going to learn how to write functions, which are named blocks of code that are designed to do one specific job. When you want to perform a particular task that you've defined in a function, you call the function responsible for it. Okay, so there's two things that you have here. You've got the function definition and then you've got the call. So why use functions? If you need to perform that task multiple times throughout the program, you don't need to type all the code for the same task again and again. You just call the function dedicated to handling that task, and the call tells Python to run the code inside the function. You'll find that using functions makes your programs easier to write, read, test, and to fix. So what else will we learn in this chapter? We'll learn about ways to pass information to functions. We'll also learn about how to return a value or a set of values. And then we'll also talk about storing functions in separate files called modules and using them there. So let's start off with the definition of a function, okay? So we're looking at one right now on the screen. The definition of my function starts here on line 3. And we're going to go over every single little word here, right? Well, before I go over every single little word, let me just point out the two little parts. Your function definition goes from line 3 to 5, right? This is your function. We know it's a function because it starts off with def keyword. We're defining a function. This is the function name. The function name has a parenthesis where we can put parameters, and it's terminated with a colon. Then indented, we have a docstring, and then we have one line of code, and it's simply saying hello. Now, none of this will happen unless we call the function. So on line 7, we've got the call, and I'm going to go ahead and do a control B, and there it is. We've got the call. If I, for example, let me just demonstrate this. If I comment out this line and do a control B, nothing happens, right? So control Z, bring it back, control B, and there we are back to the beginning. So this example shows the simplest structure for a function. The keyword def informs Python that you're defining a function. This is the function definition, which tells Python the name of the function and, if applicable, what kind of function the function needs to do its job, or what kind of information the function needs to do its job. The parenthesis holds that information. In this case, the name for the function is greet_user, open and close parenthesis. It needs no information to do its job, so its parentheses are empty. Even so, the parentheses are required. Finally, the definition ends with the colon. Any indented lines that follow the def greet_user make up the body of the function. In the body of the function, the first line of text is a comment called a docstring, which describes what the function does. Docstrings are enclosed in triple quotes, which Python looks for when it generates documentation for the functions in your program. The line print hello is the only line of actual code in the body of this function, so greet_user has just one job, print hello. When you want to use this function, you call it. A function call tells Python to execute the code in the function. To call a function, you write the name of the function followed by any necessary information in parentheses. Because no information is needed here, calling our function is as simple as entering greeter_user with the parenthesis open, parenthesis closed. As expected, it prints hello. Okay, so let's just take one look at this again. So basically, if this contained a bunch of lines of code that I would need to repeat over and over and over again, why type all that code again? I could just go in and enter in the call of that and do, let's do a control B here and see how I get the benefit of running that again. Okay, so we have two important things we're looking at here. The function definition, it is indented. The first line terminates in a colon. Then we have indentation, and then we've got the function call. Okay, so without the function call, nothing would happen, right? Nothing would happen. All right, so let's go on to our next example, which is going to give us some background on passing information to a function. So this example has a function definition with one parameter. Okay, so the function call must pass one parameter. So they got to match up. We're gonna elaborate on this idea a whole lot right now in just a little while. Okay, so let me just go ahead and run this real fast for you. Control B, and we see it says hello Jesse. Okay. So just for right now, remember, if your definition in this case has one parameter, we pass it one argument when we call it. If it has two parameters, then we pass two arguments. So those are important words here. We'll be elaborating on them. When we create the definition, we create parameter variables, and when we have our function call, we have arguments. Okay. So let's go on and continue to talk about, arguments and parameters. These are really important. Some people mix these words up, but some people are very particular about, you really need to get this out of the way. You have to understand it. So let me repeat it again. Inside the function definition, inside the parentheses, you have something called parameters. These are parameter variables. It's a piece of information the function needs to do its job. Okay? In the function call, we have something called an argument, and they've got to match up. We're going to elaborate on this matching up, but basically, if your parameter is a string, you got to pass it a string, right? You should. If it's an integer, you want to pass it an int, et cetera, right? They should match up. Right now, we're starting off with a really simple example: one parameter, right? Variable, one argument. So when we call the function, we place the value we want the function to work with in parentheses. In this case, the argument is Jesse. And it's passed to the function greet user. So Jesse goes into username, and then username is used in this print function to print the username. So it simply says hello. We have a F string that says hello Jesse. Right? Hello Jesse.title, right? We use the title method to capitalize the first character on here, right? So let's look at our first try it. And our first try it here is called message 8.1. It says write a function called display message that prints one sentence telling everyone what you are learning about in this chapter. Call the function and make sure the message displays correctly. So here it is. We've got line 1. We start, the function definition. We start off with the keyword def and then the name of the function. In this particular case, we have no parameters. Then on line 2, we have our docstring, which is documentation. Then on line 3, I have a string variable that's initialized, declared and initialized. And then on line 4, I print that string variable. Now, nothing happens until I call it. So I call the method on line 6, And let me go ahead and do that, Control B, and I'm learning to store code in functions. Okay, you know, one thing I want to talk to you about is that this author talks about docstrings, but he doesn't tell you how they're used. And that's because it's kind of like, I'm not going to say it's an advanced topic, but you pretty much do your documentation, you know, for large projects that need to have a better understanding of how your classes and methods work. I tried to go ahead and print the docstring inside of what is it, Sublime, and it didn't work. I had to end up going into VS Code. Let me show you the same program here. And in this program, what I did was I commented out the call to the function, and I show you probably the simplest way in which we can go ahead and access these docstrings. If you want to know more about this, I go ahead and provide you with this information on my in my lecture notes, you know, my online lecture notes. Okay, so for right now, when I run this print statement on line 7, what it does is it prints out the documentation line. See how it says display a message about what I'm learning. It prints out the docstring. That may not seem very informative at this point in time, but there's really a lot to this topic of documentation, especially when you're working on a large scale project. But I just thought I'd complete the circle a little bit with you all, and at least show you how these docstrings can be used. And they're used by passing the name of the function, dot, and then it's underscore, underscore, doc, underscore, underscore. All right, and that will end up printing the docstring. All right, so coming back over here to our try it 8.1. Let's go ahead and look at 8.2. And in 8.2, it's called favorite book. It says write a function called favorite book that accepts one parameter, title. And the function should print a message such as one of my favorite books is Alice in Wonderland. Call the function, make sure to include a book title as an argument in the function call. All right, so here it is. We have the definition right here on line 3. And it starts off with the keyword def, the name of the function. Remember, it's pretty much follows the same conventions as variables. We don't use capital letters. If you have 2 words, you use the underscore. That's Python style. In this case, I have one parameter variable called title. Then on line 4, I have my docstring. Then on line 5, I have my formatted string, and title is passed into a placeholder in this formatted string. So that's the definition. This is the function. Then on line 8, I call the function. And of course, if I could spell it right, okay, many times I will end up mistyping comments because there's no spell checker, right? So I'm going to call the function and pass an argument. So this right here on line 8 in the parenthesis referred to as an argument. This right here in the parenthesis in the function definition is referred to as a parameter variable. So this string right here, the abstract wild, must be a cool book, right? Ends up passing into title, and then it is printed in the formatted string. It's going to end up saying the abstract wild is one of my favorite books. Let me go ahead and run this to show that to you. The abstract wild is one of my favorite books. Okay, so that's 8.2. Then that brings us to passing arguments. Let's talk about passing arguments. Why pass multiple arguments? You know, because a function definition can have multiple parameters, a function call needs multiple arguments. You can pass arguments to your functions in a number of ways. You can use positional arguments, which need to be in the same order the parameters were written. That's the first way. The second way would be to use keyword arguments, where each argument consists of a variable name and a value. And then we'll talk about lists and dictionaries of values. We're going to look at each of these in turn. Let's talk about positional arguments first, since it's probably the easiest to understand. When you call a function, Python must match each argument in the function call with a parameter in the function definition. The simplest way to do this is based upon the order of the arguments provided. Values matched up this way are called positional arguments. So let's look at this example right here. I've got a definition, a function definition on line 2. It's got two parameter variables, one called animal type, the other one called pet name. And I use that in two print statements that have placeholders for those variables. Then on line 7, I call it. I call the function. I pass hamster as an argument, and that will pop into animal type. And I pass hairy, and that'll pass into pet name. Let me go ahead and run this real fast. So the output says, I have a hamster. My hamster's name is Harry. Harry is capitalized on the first character because we're using the title method in the placeholder there on line 5. So again, we have the function definition starting on line 2, the body of the function from line 3 to 5, which must be indented, and it's considered good form to use a docstring for every method so that later on we can go ahead and provide documentation so we can remember what we did. Now, some of these methods that we're going to make are really easy, but if there may be some methods that get very complicated and may involve mathematics and all this kind of stuff. So you may end up having a very long docstring explaining the parameters, the equations, etc. And they will play a very important part in you maintaining code, or for that matter, you having to go into someone else's code and figure out what that method is doing. Okay, so it'll be important later on. First, we got to learn how to create methods, right? And then later on, you know, we'll learn how to take advantage of the docstring. Okay, so that's positional arguments. So just remember, we've got the definition. The definition has the parameters, and in the call, we have the arguments. So let's talk about multiple function calls. Let's go on to the next one here. When we have multiple function calls, you see that on line 7 and then on line 8. Let me go ahead and just run this real fast. So what happens here is the idea that I can reuse this. You can call a function as many times as needed. Now, of course, this is just a little toy program here, but sometimes you need to have things done over and over and over again. So why would you want to go ahead and write that code so many times? You can just put it in a module and reuse it. You can use as many position arguments as you need in your function. Python works through the arguments you provide when calling the function and matches each one with the corresponding parameter in the function definition. Okay, so the idea here is that every time you call the function, you're going to have to match up. In this case, it's very easy example because we got two string variables, right? For parameter variables. So what are we going to have to pass? Two strings. And you may get some, we'll talk about this later on, but you may get some crazy unexpected behavior if you mix them up. See, like the first parameter is the animal type, and then we have the pet name. Well, what if you mix them up? Well, then you'll have a sentence being created that looks kind of weird, right? So just keep that in mind. We will be developing that a little bit more. In fact, let's just go ahead and talk about the order matters, right? The order matters in positional arguments because you can end up with some very strange stuff. So let me go ahead and run this one. And this is the strange stuff that I was talking about. So we have animal type pet name in the definition. But I pass Harry for animal type. That's not an animal type. And I pass hamster for pet name. Well, maybe you do have a pet named hamster. I mean, you call your cat hamster. I mean, you could. You never know. You know, so the output ended up saying, I have a Harry. My Harry's name is hamster. So you ended up getting some unexpected results because you mixed up the order of the arguments in a function call when using positional arguments. So if you get funny results like this, check to make sure that the order of the arguments in your function call matches the order of the parameters in the function definition. Okay. Now, some people like to kick it up a notch. This is pretty cool. And we're going to talk about keywords now. Let me run this real fast because I like to see the output from the previous program. So a keyword argument is a named value pair. It's really, really, really important here. A keyword argument is a named value pair that you pass to a function. You directly associate the name and the value within the argument. So when you pass the argument to the function, there's no confusion. So let's see what happens here. On line 7 and line 8, we got 2 calls. So look at what I'm doing here. I mean, the function definition is the same as before, I think. Yeah, it's the same. The definition has not changed. The calls have a name value pair. So instead of passing hamster to animal type and Harry to pet name, we're saying, you know what? I'm gonna make sure that hamster gets put in animal type and Harry gets put in pet name. And what happens if I reverse these? What if I list pet name first? Is that going to pop into animal type? What if I put animal type second? Will that go into pet name? And the answer is no. They will go ahead and go into the appropriate ones. So this keyword arguments free you from having to worry about correctly ordering your arguments in the function call. And they clarify the role of each value in the function call. Note, when you use keyword arguments, be sure to use the exact name of the parameters in the function definition. Well, what'll happen? You get an error, right? You'll get in other words, you'll say, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, it'll say, that's the way it'll say, there's no parameter variable called that. I mean, it'll say it a little bit more technical than that, but it'll choke. And that's important to note is when you're creating your call and you're creating this name value pair, when you're creating this keyword, okay, name value pair, right? So here's the name, here's the value. You got to make sure that you type in the parameter variables correctly. Okay, a lot of the editors will help you with that. If you have a good editor, like I think Visual Studio Code probably helps you more than anything I've seen. I'm using Sublime now because it's the easiest and doesn't have a lot of frills. Not having a lot of frills can help beginners. Okay, so I'm sticking with this for right now for my demonstrations. All right. So then on line 7, I do it, animal type hamster, pet name Harry, but then I reverse them and then look at my output. The output is the same regardless of which call I use. So keywords, a good idea. Keyword arguments, they really free you up and make sure that things get done. Of course, if you get it done the right way, then it gets done, right? So let's go ahead and talk about now default values, which is our next little demo up here. Let's look at the code a little bit better here. Got a lot of code on here, right? I'm gonna make it smaller so we can see more on the screen. So here we go. And I think I over elaborated a little bit on this one, but when writing a function, you can define a default value for each parameter. Okay, so let's look very carefully here on line 8. See right here? That's what we're talking about right there, right? So when writing a function, you can define a default value for each parameter. If an argument for a parameter is provided in the function call, Python uses the argument value. If not, it uses the parameter's default value. So when you define a default value for a parameter, you can exclude the corresponding argument you'd usually write in the function call. Using default values can simplify your function calls and clarify the way in which your functions are typically used. Okay. VIP note. Note that when the order of the parameters in the function definition, or note that the order of the parameters in the function definition has changed. Look at this. Remember in the previous example, we had animal type as the first parameter variable, and then I had pet name as the second one. Let me show you. See? The definition had animal type, pet name. Why did we change this? Because the default value makes it unnecessary to specify the type of animal as an argument. The only argument left in the function call is the pet's name. Python still interprets this as positional argument. So if the function is called with just the pet's name, the argument will match up and the first parameter is listed in the function definition. This is the reason the first parameter needs to be pet name. So note, when you use default values, any parameter with a default value needs to be listed after all the parameters that do not have default values. This allows Python to continue interpreting positional arguments correctly. So if you're going to have a default parameter variable, it's going to have to be the last one on the list, just like this example here. That's why we have to reverse them. Okay. So here are a variety of calls that I have here. I think I did more than what was in the book. The simplest way to do this would be to simply pass Willy. So if I pass Willy on here, positional arguments work, and so pet name pops in there. And I don't need the second one. If I don't pass the second argument, it'll put dog in for animal type. Let me go ahead and run this so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So the line 14 and line 15 accomplish the same thing, produces the same effect. So we're using a keyword, an argument keyword, right? So we're saying pet name gets Willy. So Willy pops into pet name. So line 14 and 15 are the same. But then let's look at 16. And 16, I say pet name gets Harry and animal type gets hamster. So in this case, it's going to use these, and it's not going to use the ones that are on the default value that's specified in the parameter variable. Okay, so it's going to say I have a hamster, and my hamster's name is Harry. And then let's just test it again without using these key values, and I pass simply Willy and cat. These are referred to explicit arguments. If you have an explicit argument, like for example, if I pass hamster, it's not going to be dog anymore, right? It's going to say hamster. If I pass cat, it's not going to be dog, it's going to be cat. So as you can see here, in the last one, I have a cat, my cat's name is Willy. we used to, Willie must be a really popular name. We had a Willie too. He was a mean old dude. He would just take off for days and come back and then eat and then take off again. So I remember Willie. But anyway, that is the concept of default value. When you talk about the default value, we're talking about default values for parameter variables. Okay, that's a slightly different than the concept of keyword arguments, which would be a keyword argument. A keyword argument would be something like this, right? So the next thing we talk about is equivalent function calls. And the idea here is because positional arguments, keyword arguments, and default values can all be used together, often you have several equivalent ways to call a function. So the idea here is that it doesn't matter which calling style you use, as long as your function call produces the output that you want. Just use the style that you find easiest to understand. So the beginner would say, you know what, I'll just use positional arguments. But you never know whether these advanced users just love to separate themselves from the mere mortals, and they will use these keyword arguments, and they will use these default values for the parameter variables. So if you're going to be maintaining code, you're going to need to know how this stuff works. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this one. So in this case, you'll notice it's the same thing. We're proving here. Let's just look at the first one on here. I've got my function definition up here on line 2, and it's got a default value. So I call it the first time with just Willie, and then I call it again with a keyword argument of Willie. You know those two are going to end up producing the same effect. Okay, fine. Let's go on to the next example here. I call again and I pass 2 strings. So Harry goes into pet name and hamster goes into animal type. It overrides the dog, right? The next one on here does the same thing. It passes Harry and hamster, but it's using keyword arguments. Then the next one on here reverses the keyword argument so that instead of saying pet name first, it says animal type gets hamster and pet name gets Harry, and we end up getting the same effect again. The benefit of using these keyword arguments is that you can reverse them, and you can rest assured that they're going to end up popping in to the right parameter variable. Okay, so that's the idea of equivalent function calls. So well, sooner or later when you're doing this stuff, you're going to end up getting an error. Okay, so we need to do our best to avoid argument errors. When will you get argument errors? Well, when you have unmatched arguments. Unmatched arguments occur when you provide fewer or more arguments than a function needs to do its work. Okay, so in this simple example here, look at line 2. How many parameter variables do I have? 2. Okay, fine. Look at line 8. How many arguments should I pass? And of course, what type of arguments and in what order? Unless you want to provide some keyword arguments to fix this up. If I were to run this right now, it's going to choke. So let me go ahead and run it. So as you can see, I ended up getting a traceback. And the traceback, sooner or later, we're going to have to start learning how to work and deal with tracebacks. We get all this information here. It's important that we start getting comfortable with this. The traceback tells us the location of the problem. So let's look at what happens here. It tells me what file. It tells me on line 8 something happened. It even tells me that it happened when I called describe underscore pet. And it says that it's a type error. It even tells me that I'm missing 2 required positional arguments, that I'm missing animal type and pet name. So it's really telling me a lot. If I could just get more comfortable with this traceback, I could end up solving a lot of my, problems when I'm coding. Okay. So now that brings us to try it yourself, 8.3. And in 8.3, it says, it's called t-shirt. Write a function call called make shirt that accepts a size and the text of the message that you should print on the shirt. The function should print a sentence summarizing the size and the shirt of the shirt and the message printed on it. Call the function once using positional arguments to make the shirt. Call the function a second time using keyword arguments. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right. Do a control plus sign to make this a little bit bigger so that you can read it on the screen, or really so that I can read it on the screen, right? So line 1 here, I've got my function definition. I notice I've got 2 parameters, one called size, one called message. And I create 2 f strings. I use these little, placeholders to put the variables in. Fine. I have one call on line 7 where I pass large and I love Python, 2 strings. So large goes into size and I love Python goes into message. Then I call it again and I'm using keyword arguments and I'm reversing the order here. So the first time I do it, I use positional arguments. And the second time I use it, I use a keyword arguments. So when I use keyword arguments, the order doesn't matter. So I could have put size gets medium in the first, but as you can see here, both of these ended up, working just fine. So the message in this case is readability counts and the size is medium. So you'll notice here it says, I'm going to make a medium t-shirt. It will say readability counts. First t-shirt says, going to make a large t-shirt and it will say, I love Python. Okay. Pretty good, really good examples. These try it yourselves are very instructive and excellent ways of learning how to program. Let's go ahead and do the next one here, exercise 8.4. And on this one here, I've got my definition on line 3, got my docstring on line 4, 2 print statements. And then the first time I call it, did I read the definition of the problem statement? I don't think I did. Let me make sure so 8.4 is called large shirts. Modify the make shirt function, the one we had before, right? So that the shirts are large by default with a message that reads, I love Python. Make a large shirt and a medium shirt with the default message and make a shirt of any size with different message. Okay, so that's fine. So here's my definition. Now I've changed it from before. See, like before it just said size and message. Okay, so now it says size gets large and message gets I love Python. These are the default. Okay, so I'm going to be using default values for the parameter variables if none are provided. So the first time I call this method, I pass nothing. You say, well, didn't you say you have well, if you're using these default values, then you can pass nothing, and it will go ahead and put in the default values. You won't get an error message, right? Maybe that's one good reason to use these default values, right? So then the second time I call the method, I pass size gets medium. That overrides size gets small. Let me run this. Okay. But it doesn't override the I love Python because it doesn't have that. It uses the default then. The default message is used the second time. So in line 10, both defaults are used. In line 11, only the second default is used. And then in the third example here, I pass small and I pass programmers are loopy, whatever that means, right? Line 12 passes 12 for size. So it's going to say, I'm going to make a small t-shirt. It will say programmers are loopy. Excellent example of default parameter values, as well as the use of keyword arguments. Let's go ahead and look at our last example here for this section. And let me go ahead and run it real fast. I don't like to see the output from the previous one on there. This is called 8.5 cities. Write a function called describe underscore city that accepts the name of a city and its country. Okay. The function should print a simple sentence such as Reykjavik is in Iceland. I would love to go there. All right, I would love to. I don't know if anybody else would like to go over there. I mean, I think it would be beautiful for some reason or another. Like this guy must like the north because he lives in Alaska. So, I know this is on the other side. But anyway, so give the parameter for the country a default value. Call your function for three different cities, at least one of which is not the default value. Okay, so the name of the function is called describe city. So I pass in city, but I've got a default country of Chile. Doesn't matter. Got my docstring, and the message says city is in Chile. All right. So the first time I come in here, I pass Santiago. Santiago is in Chile. Then I pass on line 9, I pass Reykjavik, right? And Iceland. Both of these, keyword, not keyword, both of these are going to end up going in, well, Reykjavik is going to go into city, and Iceland is going to supersede the default parameter value up here. So it will not be Chile, it'll be Iceland. And then this last one on here, Punta Arias, will go into city, which is in Chile. And the message utilizes the title method of the variable name so that the first character of the city is capitalized. Okay. So that is this section on part 1, defining a function and passing arguments. I want to go ahead and leave you with the idea that you should be looking at the cheat sheets that your author provides. Let me go ahead and open up the one for functions. And I like these. I like to look at these before I read the chapter, and I recommend, and I also think that you should look at them after you read the chapter. So let me go ahead and put this on the screen. And so it's called Beginner's Python Cheat Sheet Functions. So it goes undefined. It tells you what a function is, what a function definition is, and it gives you like a really nice little example of the definition and the call. Then it goes on and talk about passing a single argument, and it gives you an example. So here we have a definition that takes one parameter variable, so we pass it one argument. In this case, we're calling it 3 times. So it's, we can call a method multiple times. Then it goes on to talk about positional and keyword arguments. So using positional arguments, in this particular case, they pop in. The first argument pops into the first parameter variable. The second argument pops into the second parameter variable. Unless you make keyword arguments. In this particular case, I can go ahead and these name value pairs can really help you from not making mistakes when you're doing, when you're passing arguments to the parameters. Then we talk about the default values. The default values for the parameter variables are specified in the function definition. In this case, we see that animal gets dog. In the example here, I pass Harry and hamster. So in this first one, hamster will supersede dog. So it'll, instead of saying that Harry's a dog, it'll say that Harry's a hamster. And this, in the second call, Willie will pop in the name, and Willie will be a dog. Well, wasn't he a cat before? Then the rest of this stuff goes on to talk about the stuff that we haven't covered, that we'll cover in the next part of your chapter, where we'll talk about return values. We'll also talk about passing a list to a function, arbitrary number of arguments. We'll also talk about ways of structuring ways of structuring your function, and we'll talk about modules. This is pretty cool. This is where you end up putting, your methods in a separate file. We will handle that topic in a different video. But other than that one, thank you very much. And this is Professor Benavides, over and out.